Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, when controversial figures are slain in cold blood, and the response from the internet or the metaverse is in memes, mockery, and ridicule, we know that there is something fundamentally wrong with society. Whether you are Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, gunned down by Luigi Mangione, or you're JFK, sniped by Lee Harvey Oswald, or most recently, Charlie Kirk, shot in cold blood and killed in front of thousands of people by Tyler Robinson, we think that these forms of reaction of slander and libel without the consent of these deceased individuals and their family perpetuate a very form of toxic discourse and culture and the perpetuation of degeneracy. Because, in as much as we might not like these people, in as much as these people may be controversial, these people still deserve a degree of respect, and them being dead and the fact that they cannot consent to these things demand some sort of peace and quiet, given that these people obviously cannot consent. This is not a debate about Charlie Kirk being good or bad and what they stood for, but ultimately, this is about the response of people and the response of the internet in terms of being able to come in and see the extent of how they react. Because what this brings into the sphere of the internet plunges them and brings out the worst in people when young people start seeing these things on Reddit, TikTok, and Instagram and think that it's fine and it's okay to treat people who are slain in that way. Firstly, what do we mean by oppose? What we mean by oppose is opposing this in direct and indirect ways, hard and soft ways, under a few parameters. Number one, the general distaste and dissent for this, similar to how the progressive liberal left react to anyone they like dying or getting ridiculed, meaning the same way people are not okay with ridiculing Gandhi, JFK, or whoever person that they like Ninoy Aquino being assassinated. The same way that the left or society would not like us dunking and shitting on those people, the same way would apply to people on the right. Secondly, censorship and removal of this media in its softest form, because we recognize that to some extent these things will not go away. We can have stronger forms of censorship to be able to make these things even more accessible, especially for minors and people who do not consent to this or can potentially be scandalized by all of these forms of ridicule. And in the hardest form, being able to purge and remove slowly from the internet existing traces of these things, meaning being able to crack down on people who spread these things, akin to what we do things which are libelous and slandered. Why? Because I think ridiculing people and reacting in this way to some extent is an extension of hate speech. That is to say, there is no consent from the person because they're fucking dead. There's no consent from their lawyers and their estate who probably don't want ongoing investigations and being able to protect their loved ones, like their family and their children. And even more so, those people who lost a particular relative and are coping do not want to be
POI.
constantly seeing these things in social media. Yeah, what's your POI?
So if I were to get assaulted and I called my assaulter ugly and disgusting, yes, those things might be hurtful, but do you not think that this is a valid emotional response for me to make?
No, it's not. Like, you can do it, but that doesn't mean we should support doing it this way because there are many other productive ways to do it, like calling him out for raping you as opposed to saying, mataba siya, hindi siya guwapo, ganyan. And I think that that's exactly where the tipping point lies in terms of the coping mechanism of what their side and the general left want to be able to forward. They want to try and be able to call out certain bad elements, but the way this memeification goes, as what they admitted in their POI, is that it degenerates into ad hominem response that make it more difficult to be able to determine signal from noise when you try and collude and reinforce these cults of personality. The third part about these things is we want to be able to forward some sort of information campaign in terms of helping young people and people online be able to post responsibly, given that there are better ways of being able to call out someone you don't like or call out someone controversial. The second thing I want to talk about is I think the specific nuance to Kirk is that they're a very controversial figure. Look, Matt and I aren't apologists, but what we're saying is that when you react in these ways, it fuels a certain sense of radicalization and cults of personality that ultimately fragment the movement. Case in point, when the right-wing conservatives who were offended by these things reacted in a very mudslingy kind of way, wherein they started to talk about certain rape victims or other people that these particular people in society didn't like, and they reacted and started memifying it. So it creates a meme war in a very toxic, useless kind of way. So what are the impacts here, right? Because what I've proved so far, or what I've talked about, is why freedom of speech is cool, but it's not an overriding good in as much as it perpetuates a certain kind of double standard. The first thing that I want to explain as an impact is that I understand, I get it. This person is controversial, you might not like what they want, but we think that this post-mortem ad hominem that you do on your side ultimately radicalizes the particular movement and incites certain mudslinging and violence from these people. What this does is that this creates a very toxic form of discourse that, like I mentioned in my pre-oration, makes it quite difficult to distinguish who that person is versus their messaging. Because you're grounding it and you're focusing on the focal point of them dying, which I think, regardless of them not being someone we like, isn't justified to make sure to send the message that someone was killed in cold blood, and also makes it harder to be able to call it out. Because the very people who you're trying to correct, whether they're the moderates or the right, are likely to react in a very memeified, disrespectful way that makes this discourse very toxic and ultimately muddles the ability of what you're trying to call out. So, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of being able to forward the message that we want, we think that it's ultimately best that you're able to separate these things and not devolve into a certain sense of degeneracy that can cripple the way in which we view people and we view bad things happening. Very proud to open on side proposition.